That was Thomas Airy, the rugby writer for the Samoa Observer. And just a reminder as well, our rugby coverage on Off the Ball is brought to you by Vodafone, team of us, everyone in. Time now to speak to a veteran of 42 Test caps and 2 Rugby World Cups, former Samoa second row, and current CEO of the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare Group, Dan Leo. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
I'm going to get into your work, obviously, with the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare Group in a little while. But first of all, though, I just want to talk about your own experiences playing for Samoa and playing at the Rugby World Cup. Obviously, you were born and grew up in New Zealand. I read an interview recently enough where you were talking about the Israel-Folau situation, and there was just one line in it in particular that stuck with me. You just kind of mentioned that how someone like Folau would have been raised into a Pacific Island community despite the fact that he was born in Australia, and as you say, you might as well be in the islands if you're in that situation. Obviously, you were born in New Zealand, obviously although of Samoan descent. Is that something that would have resonated for you very much? It's just you're in one country, you're in New Zealand, but you're almost living a Samoan, a Pacific Island life.
Yeah, exactly. We see it not just in the Pacific communities, but in a lot of the expat communities around the world. You know, here in the UK, people have migrated here, find little pockets and stick together, and are supported by the community. You know, they find comfort and solace in being sticking to their community. So we do that exactly in the Pacific Islands. You know, I grew up in Auckland, which was a real hotbed of the biggest population of Pacific Islanders in the world now. But you know, closely followed by Sydney. And having experienced that, you grew up. You know, I grew up as a proud New Zealander, but very much in touch with my Samoan heritage. The language, and actually, in those communities, sometimes you hold on to your culture a lot stronger than even when you're at home. So what I've noticed is that the Samoan culture and heritage is a lot more stronger and prevalent outside of Samoa than it is necessarily in Samoa. That's the nature of life, I guess, and it does make it interesting in the Folau situation.
Mm-hmm. Specifically on the Rugby World Cup, though, Samoa's great Rugby World Cup was 1991 when they shocked Wales and got to the quarterfinals. I'm guessing you would have been probably around 8 or 9, I'm guessing, around that stage. There would have been in that team a lot of New Zealand-born players there, Pat Lam, Peter Fadialofa and a few more as well. And obviously the great Brian Williams was involved with the coaches. As a young kid of Samoan heritage growing up in New Zealand, seeing those guys who would have had a pretty similar story to yourself, is that something that would have resonated with you as a kid?
Yeah, definitely. I still remember it really clearly. My dad waking me up at 3 or 4 in the morning for to watch Samoa's games across the world, and the World Cup from here in the UK, and Samoa being the first the first team that I supported from that young age, and really just getting behind the underdog, and just what that team did for us as young Samoans growing up, particularly in New Zealand. Where there is a risk of losing your identity. It was a massive thing, and guys like for me now in my career, I still lean on guys like that, like your Michael Jones, your Pat Lambs, some of the guys out, Apollo Perolini, Junior Paramore's on the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare Board. So it's great to see those guys. Not only did they make their mark on Pacific Island rugby back then in the 90s, but they're still making that, and they're still contributing to our communities now, and really trying to make the life easier for the next generation of players coming over here, particularly to places like Europe and Japan.
And I imagine then an enormous honour when the chance came for you to pull on the Samoa jersey.
Yeah, of course it was. It's something that you really cherish, particularly I think when it's gone, when your career's when you can't play international rugby anymore. And I look back with really fond memories on the whole time. I was lucky enough to play for over a 10-year period for Samoa. Only accrued under 50 caps. I look at some of the guys that I played with. Your James Haskell's, etc., who played for England for that long and probably, got closer to 100 caps. But it presents its own challenges. Playing for the Pacific sides isn't easy, but it's probably one of the most fulfilling the most fulfilling nations you can play for as well.
Yeah, you played at 2 World Cups, 2007 and 2011. You retired a few months before 2015, and I was reading up on that in the last couple of days. Shortly before you retired from international rugby, you had kind of been speaking about the fact that so many players from not just Samoa, from Fiji as well and Tonga as well, there's a lot of pressure on them to step aside from the international game, coming up towards a contract negotiations with clubs and moving on to new clubs. Was that something that was, very much your case?
For me, it was more, I've been outspoken as a senior player in 2014 around some of the issues, the mismanagement issues that we had in our union. We really wanted to confront, as a senior players group, some of the corruption that we had been provided evidence of, and myself being sort of at the forefront of that movement. There was a few of us that were branded as troublemakers within the Samoan side, but for really asking those questions. So for me, it was more of a case of jumping before I got pushed. I think.
Yeah.
And it did take a toll. 2014 took a massive toll on me, probably more mentally than physically. When you're in a culture like ours, I was asking questions of the hierarchy and of senior politicians. We're in the position where our Prime Minister is the chairman of the Samoa Rugby Union, similar in Fiji. So it was a tough time period of my life, and I just thought, after 2014, I was probably mentally tired. I didn't feel like I was and so I guess the whole World Cup experience and international experience have been tarnished a bit for me by that period. And you sort of, the longer in the game, you sort of closer you get to the top, you realise that things aren't all rosy. It's not all a bed of roses at the top. There are some issues that need addressing, and I sort of saw that as an opportunity for me to move into that, straight away. And I didn't, I wanted, I think I wanted the team to be able to go to the World Cup with a fresh slate, and you can't be carrying that sort of baggage into a World Cup. So as I say, it was probably a decision that I could come to before, a few months before, but I don't think they would have picked me anyway. So it was an easy retirement for me.
You say it's an easy retirement, but was it a difficult decision to come to?
Yeah, of course it was. Everyone wants to play in the World Cup, and that's the pinnacle of everyone's career. I was, I guess, blessed and fortunate in ways that I already played in two World Cups. So, I was at the end of my career, and you want to, every player wants to be able to leave the jersey in a better place than they pick it up in. And for me, that was a way, by not shying away from those issues and actually trying to make a stand before we got to the World Cup in 2015 was, almost my way of saying, look, we can actually do something special here. We've got the players, we've got the people behind us, but really there's a whole lot of off-field issues that were holding us back. That for us to put our best foot forward as a squad, they needed confronting, and unfortunately, they needed someone to sort of spearhead that movement, and that was myself. Strongly supported by some of the other, Census Johnston, David Lemmy, Murray Fasavalu, Tusi Pisi. A whole group of senior players that had got to know each other very well, and at the time we were I think ranked 7th or 8th in the world. We'd just come off a tour in South Africa. We had beaten Scotland and Italy, and then come back and beat Wales in Cardiff, less than 12 months later. So we were really at our pinnacle, I think, and it was sad to sort of have to, to not be involved in that, and just not to see us really, I think, fulfill our potential as a squad. But as I say, there's sometimes in rugby and in sport, there's bigger issues, and you've got to think about, the next generations that are coming behind you. And realistically, the chance to do that was then in 2014-15, because while you're in the squad, you've got an influence. When you're out of it, it's difficult. And I think naturally at the end of 2015, they'll probably look at making a turnover of some of those senior players anyway. So we had to move then. As you say, it's unfortunate because personally, I would have loved to have been there, but it raises questions. And a big part of my role now is really confronting these issues and and the politics, the influence of politicians and stuff that occurs in the islands and isn't really an issue for many other countries. And really trying to affect change and getting groups like World Rugby, as the governing body, to enforce the change that we need to really be able to step into the potential that we know is there in the Pacific Islands.
Mm-hmm. I might just get you to tilt your camera ever so slightly up. The top of your face is just disappearing slightly from us. That's perfect. Just to go back though on the issue of players kind of being pressurised into stepping away from international rugby. I haven't seen a huge amount of Samoa players in the last year or so. You can correct me on that, but certainly this year with Fiji, the likes of Nagusa and Nemani Nadolo as well, have both within a few days of each other announced their retirements from international rugby in a World Cup year, shortly after signing a new contract with their clubs.
Yeah. I mean, Nemani Nadolo sits on the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare Board, and we'll discuss that. I think I'm not sure around the circumstances of Nagusa, but everyone's got there's different things that at play all the time, and for us as Pacific Islands, the financial it's the financial aspect of the game is for a lot of us is while we play. For so long in our careers, and while we make the sacrifice of moving away from our families, is to support them, but also it's why we play so well. When you've got the pressure can be sort of a catch-22 because it can be something that holds you back, but if you work it in the right way, it can be something that really propels you forward. But outside of those two, I'm coming across you, and I just discussed with another player in France who's been offered incredible amounts of money to not go to the World Cup, and at the moment Regulation 9 doesn't allow for that. They can't stop you from going to the World Cup. But nothing to say that we're not going to add, we're not going to give you an extra 15,000 euros per month on top of what the 30 a month that you're already getting to stop you from going, and that's a difficulty again. That's something that probably needs to be addressed. For the credibility of obviously the World Cup and also the sport, you want your best players to be there. And if some of these Pacific Island teams are going to be, and not just Pacific Island teams, Tier 2 nations, I'd go as far as saying, are going to be competitive, and it's going to be, and we're looking at growing the game. Then you need the best players to be there, and definitely that's something that's hindering. There's that's hindering the game from developing as it should.
And I imagine this sort of an issue is exactly the type of thing that would have prompted you to set up the Pacific Players Welfare Group a few years ago.
We've got 800 players across France alone now. And close to nearly over 1,000 players playing professionally or semi-professional throughout Europe, and with that poses a lot of issues, especially in those lower divisions where guys aren't getting the financial remuneration that the top guys are getting, but they've got the similar demands on them from the families, a financial expectation, but they don't have the support networks around them to really thrive under that. So we set up, myself and the other key Pacific Island players from around the world really set up this organisation to give back to them, to those guys who are really chasing the dream. But within that, we've had to take on, and look at the causal factors behind that. Really, the root causes of this migration, which, as I touched on earlier, is the lack of a professional pathway in the Pacific. The financial share, the fact that it's, all the money now lies in the European competitions, and it is a long way from home for guys. Social isolation, loneliness. Leads to those two things alone. The cultural differences, the language difficulties. Lead to all sorts of areas, and in the worst instances, we've seen a number of guys take their own, players take their own lives. But between that and the top level, there's a lot of people who are, they may not be drowning, but they're definitely sinking. And we really wanted to touch on that by setting, so we've set up specialist mental health services. Particularly, with counsellors who are used and have a rapport with Pacific Island players, but really breaking the stigma around that. We spent 4 days in Lourdes, just returned from France, where we gathered all 400 of the players and families in Lourdes, the spiritual capital of France, on the last weekend, to really talk about some of these issues. And really, that's where we see our. Obviously, we are advocates for change at the top level because. We have to, unless we get a better deal from the governing body and World Rugby. Nothing's going to change, but we really see it as a two-pronged attack, supporting the players who are coming here en masse, and also affecting the policy that really has impacted this, and really we see as the causal factor of this tide of players and families away from the Pacific Islands, particularly to Europe.
Yeah, and like you mentioned World Rugby there, obviously, in the last few months, you in particular would have been quite outspoken on the plans for this Nations Championship or Nations League that World Rugby are trying to drive through. Initially, you had suggested that Pacific nations and Tier 2 nations should boycott the Rugby World Cup. Since then, we've had a few more details come through. There's been talk of a promotion relegation system. Are you still quite sceptical on the way this tournament would work if it was pushed through?
Yeah, I am. Anything that's driven by the bottom line and money, I'm skeptical of, because that's not rugby. Rugby has never been a sport that's been that the decision making process has been purely financially driven, and it's a dangerous place to be. I think if that's the sole factor that you're making decisions and driving competitions on. I understand that money is important. But any sort of competition that looks at ring fencing and enhancing, the difference between tiers 1 and 2 and 3 is detrimental in my point of view. If anything, we should be trying to bring up, get rid of the tier systems, not trying to enforce them and make those gaps greater. And for us as as Tonga and Samoa, Fiji, if they're in that competition, it's great for them. But for anyone that's not inside it, I can't see it being too great. But I like to think that those conversations are being had around that top governing table. But yeah, it's all a little bit too grey really, and until we see a few more details around the financial share of that competition, then it's hard to pass judgment. But initially, when it came out, when it was just looking at ring fencing, I think the competition, the top 10 nations for up to 10 years, didn't look good, did it?
No, certainly not. How far away do you think we are from seeing one of the Tier 1 nations, the big countries, I'm talking New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, Six Nations teams, going on a tour of the Pacific Islands?
But to be honest, I think that reality is getting further and further away. In the last 20 years, I think no one's been to Tonga, and there are Tonga's a top 12. I think they're in the top 15 nations of the world, but they haven't had any Tier 1 nations visit them in almost 20 years. For me, that's not good enough. If we're looking at growing the game, the top nations have got to visit the smaller, the developing nations. It's the only way that you're going to grow the exposure in those nations, and also give young players the hope that they aren't out in the dark. And the goodwill that would do for the sport would be amazing, but we just haven't seen that in the last 10 years. I understand they're looking at coming out with the next 10-year schedule fairly soon, and as soon as this nation's championship is organised. But yeah, any competition again that locks out and doesn't ensure that there's opportunities for Tier 2 nations to play against and actually beat the Tier 1s. I look back at my career and beating the Wallabies in Australia and beating Wales and France are great, but come to Samoa, come to Samoa and play us there, and and we will see. I always like think back to my career, and if we'd had if we played England and Samoa, I like to think we would have got a lot closer than in 2014 when we lost 28 points to 6, I think it was, or something like that. So yeah, I mean it throws up a lot of questions, but I like to see and I think if you ask the players, you speak to the players and the fans, they'd love, English players and fans would love to come to Samoa or Fiji or Tonga and experience the culture, and just the but unfortunately at the moment they're being deprived of that opportunity, and it's sad really.
Yeah, I can't imagine there's any players of the big Six Nations or Sanzar countries that wouldn't love to go and play a tour over in the Pacific Islands. Just finally, before you go as well, I just wanted to mention the Oceans Apart series that you would have released in the last couple of weeks. The first video with Rupeni Tautau. You obviously played him on the Pacific Islands tour where you got 3 of your test caps. What else have you got coming up in these videos? The first one was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's funny. We set out to make a documentary, and it's that's still very much the case. It's called The Oceans Apart, the story of Pacific rugby, which is really looking at the governance and all the challenges that we've just spoken about, and how we can how the Pacific Islands can navigate and survive, I guess, in the professional era. But outside of that, we had 35 hours of footage with a whole host of all of the top names in Pacific rugby we got interviews with. So, guys from Vainga Tuingamala to Nicky Gonover to Pat Lam to Taulupu Falatau, you name it, they're in there. But getting all of that into an hour 20 documentary is very difficult. So we decided to release the Oceans Apart series to promote the release of the documentary later on in the year, and it's individual stories really. It's exciting. There's lots of and everyone. I think that's I guess the wider picture is it is a rich story, and everyone's coming from different places. We speak to Samisa Rokoduguni about his decision to play for England instead of Fiji, and how that was received back at home in the islands, and and then I speak to Charles Piatel about his journey coming through the All Blacks. So there's the whole range of different stories, and really rich stories, and they're unravelled in the series. But I guess it's just really raising the awareness around all the issues that that Pacific Island rugby face, and then through that the raising of the awareness, hopefully we can affect and the policy change that we need to really flourish.
Okay, for anyone who wants to watch that video on Rupeni Tautau, you can catch it on Twitter at Pacific Welfare, and we'll keep an eye out as well for the rest of these videos as and when they come. Dan Leo, thanks a million for joining us this afternoon.
Brilliant. Been a pleasure. Thanks again.
Take care. That's it for Land of the Rising Scrum this week. We've now completed Pool A, 4 episodes down. Still 15 more to come, though, as we get through Pools B, C and D. You can listen back to the podcast of this on offtheball.com, or you can watch it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/offtheball. We'll be back for more next week.